What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Welcome to the first training camp episode of the Lightning Round podcast with me and Craig. We've been off for a while, enjoying a summer break, and now it's time to get back to it. So, unfortunately, we're here. The primary reason we're here, as you can see from the title from the show, is we had some less than encouraging news. I'm not going to call it bad news yet because we don't really know what to expect, but some less than encouraging news on Justin Herbert, who had a foot injury that was announced today. And we're going to talk about that at length. And then we're going to go through some position battles, talk about some observations, some things we're hearing about the players, about the coaches, some things maybe we're not hearing at certain position battles, and kind of work our way through camp a little bit. So, Craig, I know you mentioned in a private chat with me and Garrett that you've dealt with a plantar fascia injury in the past. So why don't we start with you? You can talk a little bit about what that plantar fascia injury is and what it feels like and things like that. And then we can kind of get into what it means for the rest of training camp and the preseason and the regular season.
Yeah, so it's not the most glowing of conversations to have at this point. But before we get into that, I also mentioned that I feel like this might be me a little bit. Maybe I'm a jinx because I have yet to see a live, fully healthy Justin Herbert experience to this point. In 2022, I was at the Chiefs game. That was the torn rib cartilage game. And then last year, week 4 against the Raiders, I was in SoFi for the broken finger game. And now rolling into camp next week, I get to watch the incomparable QB skills of the three horsemen, Easton Stick, Casey Ballman and Max Duggan. So not exactly sure what I did to deserve this honor, but wow. So plantar fasciitis is what I had. Now, hopefully that's all Justin has, and it's not something more serious like a tear. Personally, for me, I mean, when you're talking plantar fasciitis, that's more of the inflammation of the tissue that connects the heel to the toes. And that sucks. You get out of bed first thing in the morning, it feels like just nails are being jammed into the arch of your foot. For me, after walking for about 30, 45 minutes, it subsided a bit, but you would always feel it. But every morning it would start all over again. So I don't know what the severity of it is for Justin. If it's just plantar fasciitis, there are ways to work around that. But if it's something a little bit more serious and it could linger throughout the year, which is what some of the rumors are, I don't think we know very much as a whole to this point. So keeping our fingers crossed. But the last thing we need is him going into a new system, having to deal with an injury, especially in a system where, I mean, he was being discussed, and we even saw it in practice in certain clips. They were using his legs a lot more. He was being more mobile. You were seeing some inside zone where he was keeping the ball, some option plays, and he actually scored a touchdown on one. It was a scramble. It was just a long scramble, looked like sort of a broken play, but it's not encouraging when you have a quarterback whose mobility has kind of not been utilized to the extent that it could be, and you're looking at a situation where he could be hampered going into the year. So not even something that happens during the season, something like he's going to have to go into the season having to deal with, and it may not subside until he could really take a break, and it's not time for a break. It's ramp up time. So it's really unfortunate. Again, hoping for the best. Maybe it's just a plantar fasciitis situation and not a tear. And then again, they can kind of mitigate some of that pain and he can work around it. But as things currently stand, we're kind of in the dark.
So, from what I understand, I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one. But after spending a couple hours researching it today and reading what the team and people are saying about it, they have not termed it plantar fasciitis yet. They're calling it a plantar fascia injury.
Uh-huh.
So there is a distinction there. And for those of you who don't know, I know we've all heard this term as sports fan. The plantar fascia is the tissue that connects the heel to the ball of the foot and the toes. And it's what creates and supports the arch of the foot. And it's kind of a weird injury in that I work in the workman's comp industry, and in our industry, we would call this a cumulative trauma injury, which means it's an injury that comes from repetitive, continuous use of a body part, usually continuous motion or things like that. It's an aggravation or an injury that happens, and then you continue to walk on it, run on it, and whatever, and it gets better overnight. And then once you use it again, it gets worse, and it never really fully goes away. and it requires continuous treatment. And I've seen some people saying, well, they've been so coy with camp talking about how somebody's going through something. Oh, Slater's going through something, Gus is going through something, and not clarifying what they're going through. But they were quick to say, well, Justin has this plantar fascia injury. It's got to be terrible. Well, I think he played on it all through practice yesterday, from what I understand. And like Craig was saying, when somebody has a plantar fascia injury, you can run on it, you can continue to exercise on it and things like that, and you don't really feel it at the time because it's in continuous use. Once it rests and the injury kind of contracts and starts to heal, and then you use it again, that's when you start to feel it. And what I've been reading, again, not a doctor, not pretending to be one, but from what I've been reading, it sounds like usually when you feel it the worst is in the morning after you've been off your feet for 12 hours, 8 hours, whatever. And you use it that first time and your feet are just your foot's just in agony. Craig, you described it as like knives in your foot kind of a thing.
I mean, I practiced with it, and I was able to play a couple games through it and felt just fine. Again, I was a little nuts. I have a really high pain tolerance. So, I mean, I just deal with it in the morning. It was terribly painful, but just once the blood gets flowing and it was stretched out, I had it taped up and wrapped. So I was able to kind of make it work, but it's not something you want to have to deal with first thing in the morning. Definitely limits your mobility, and depending on the severity of it and your pain tolerance will kind of determine how mobile you'll be able to be on it altogether.
It could be anything from like a strain to a micro tear to a rupture. There's like a whole range of potential injuries you can have, and we don't know what it is yet because the Chargers haven't shared that. So it sounds like rest is the thing for it. You want to stay off your foot. You want to kind of immobilize it, not put any weight on it. So they've got him in a boot. Hopefully they're going to have him in like a scooter or something as well. Bubble tape it. Don't let anybody touch it. Don't look at it. Don't touch it. Don't come anywhere near it. You can stretch it apparently, and that helps to some extent. So, you're just going to have to wait and see. But right now, I think it's not good news. It's not news that has me excited, but I think it's a little early to get worried yet. We have 4 weeks before the season starts. I've seen this kind of thing can heal anywhere from 2 to 6 to 12 weeks, just depending on kind of how much rest you can get. So it kind of depends. But this is a new training staff. They caught it early, fortunately, and they're going to rest it and be careful with them. So let's give it some time before we get all worked up and get panicked. It's an injury. It's not good news. And there are obviously going to be, repercussions down the line in terms of lost time and lost reps and things like that we'll talk about. But let's not panic just yet and from an injury perspective, because we don't really know what it is or how bad it is or what to expect from it. So right now, let's just give it 2 or 3 weeks, see what they say at that point. And then if he's still hobbling around, if he's still in pain after 2 or 3 weeks, then maybe we have a bigger issue at hand. But right now, let's just give it some time, and hopefully they're taking care of it. And this is I think this is a vastly improved training group than the Chargers have had maybe ever. So hopefully they'll figure it out and take care of it.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest here. If he showed up with a boot to practice tomorrow, everyone would be freaking out. So it seems like they tried to get ahead of it. And I don't think the excuse of working through something would have been enough. So they probably felt compelled to give up a little bit more information. I mean, they're still going to get questioned about it. But again, can you imagine stepping up to the podium and having to answer questions about the boot being on the kid's foot and giving very, very limited information? I'm sure that wouldn't go over well. So I'm not really shocked that they gave out as much info as they did today.
So let's talk a little bit about what this means for camp, for the preseason, potentially for the regular season, just from a, chemistry building rep time on the field perspective. Because I think that's kind of what most of us are worried about. They're installing a new offense, all new skill players. 60% of the offensive line is either new or playing new positions. There are a lot of things that need to be worked out from a timing, from a relationship, chemistry standpoint, just knowing where people are going to be, trusting they're going to do their job. And those are the kinds of reps that you need when you're installing a new offense to be ready for the regular season. And now they're not going to have that. So I think that's really the biggest issue for me right now. If in 2 or 3 weeks he's still not, ready to start getting back into football activities, then we can talk about bigger issues. But I don't know if you agree, Craig. I just feel like losing that time, losing the opportunity to build the chemistry and the relationships and just really get comfortable in the system. I think that's where it hurts the most. Just because this is a vastly different system than they're used to running, and probably going to be much more detailed and technical and voluminous than what they're used to running. So he needs time to run it and to get comfortable with it.
Well, yeah, overall, I mean, it's just time on task like anything else. New scheme altogether, and you have to think about collectively how it affects the team in general with the offense. Now you're going to have Herbert not working with the first team offense or any of the offense for the time being. And so you have to adjust to new snap cadences and everything from your backup quarterbacks. And even though like these aren't the guys who are going to be starting the season, hopefully, the offensive line is going to have to adapt to that now for the foreseeable future until Justin's back, and it just kind of throws timing off. And you're going to stick Easton Stick in there with the ones. He doesn't have the same timing in the passing game with the wide receivers. Of course, he throws a very different ball. And the offense is just going to look different in general. And it's not the way that you want to start off a new scheme altogether, because there needs to be kind of that cohesion that builds with the team throughout training camp. It's kind of the point of it. It's not necessarily a situation where you have the luxury of, let's say, like a Kansas City, where they've been running the same scheme for years and nothing's really changed. They just sprinkle in some new things here and there, and the wheels keep rolling. So it's unfortunate that Herbert has to miss his time, because they definitely need to have that time together and time on task in this scheme so that things can kind of gel together for the start of the season. Because what now happens is that those first few games, when you're starting to work the kinks out of things and you get about 5 or 6 games in and you kind of sort of start to hit your stride, well, that's pushed back even farther, because Justin's not going to have these preseason reps. I'm not even really talking about game reps. I mean, he may have played in a few preseason games and taken snaps there, but just from a practice perspective, where you can control the environment and get as many of those quality reps as humanly possible. So now that falls in the hands of Easton Stick. And so, again, we mentioned it. It's not ideal, but if anyone can step in and kind of pick up the reins, I mean, I trust Justin Herbert to be able to do that. He's already shown himself to be apparently very adept at the scheme. He's been complimented by the coaching staff already, the way he's just kind of been able to pick up and get guys in the right spot, not only knowing what he's supposed to do, but the rest of the offense as well. So I don't think the kid's going to fall off from a mental standpoint, but when we're talking about just, again, those reps, quality reps, controlled reps, all that matters. And you need that, especially when you're, starting a new scheme.
Yeah. And for all the wide receivers who are trying to earn time, and earn spots on the team, things change for all of them, right? You mentioned different rhythm, different timing, different tempo, different cadences with Easton Stick. He throws a different ball, like you mentioned, different ball placement. Ball's going to come out faster with Herbert, obviously. It changes more than likely their ability to stretch the field. So it kind of puts the clamps on their ability to create explosive plays in the passing game to an extent. And that's for the guys at the top of the depth chart at the skill positions. Then you start talking about the guys at the bottom of the depth chart, guys who have been taking throws from Stick. Now they've got to work with Casey Bauman and Max Duggan. And it sounds like Duggan's been decent in camp for the most part, and he's shown more accuracy and a stronger arm. But still, you go from taking throws from Stick, who's in his 4th or 5th year in the league now, and has been around and is comfortable, to 2 guys who are just trying to hang on to a roster spot at this point. Again, ball placement's going to be different. The way the ball comes out of their hand, it's going to be different. Timing, tempo, cadence, all of that is different. The way they see the field is obviously going to be different. And the kinds of throws they can make is going to be different. So it's going to kind of muddy the waters for some of these guys. The guys that are fighting for wide receiver 6, it changes things for them. And then everybody below them who are fighting for, anywhere from probably 2 to 3 practice squad spots. It changes for them, because now it's going to be harder to evaluate them, because who knows if the ball is going to be where it's supposed to be. So it just changes the ball game for all the skill players. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge they're going to have is the evaluation aspect and figuring out who's going to make the team at those skill positions, who's going to be on the practice squad, because how do you evaluate guys if you can't get the ball to them?
Well, ironically enough, the guy that might have a leg up on the rest of the competition would be Quentin Johnston when you consider the time he spent with Max Duggan. So just from what I saw today, it looks like they had a pretty decent connection for whatever that's worth.
Well, anything that helps Johnston at this point is a good thing. So,
amen.
So hopefully he gets comfortable and he starts making more plays. So let's talk a little bit about some observations from camp. I think we've kind of taken the Herbert talk about as far as we can. So let's talk a little bit about some observations from camp. And my first observation is the coaching staff. Something that I've kind of been noticing as I'm watching clips and hearing to the way the coaches are talking to the players and vice versa is it just seems like there's a heightened level of trust in the coaches from the players. You hear on both sides of the ball guys talking about the coaches making the adjustments in the moment, seeing something. If the players see something they don't like, if something didn't go the way that they thought it should, they'll go to the coaches and say, hey, that didn't work out quite the way it should. Can we try that again? And they'll run it again and get it right. And you can hear the coaches telling them, hey, got to get it right. Let's go fix it. Let's do it right now. And it just kind of builds that trust, that attention to detail, the ability to communicate and share frustrations and work through them on the field and not have them linger. I think those are issues that have plagued the Chargers for, the last 3 coaching staffs.
At least.
So seeing a coaching staff that's willing to fix things in the moment, that isn't hard-headed, it doesn't appear to be my way or the highway with any of these coaches. It just seems like they want the players to feel comfortable and confident that if something's going wrong, that it's going to get fixed on the field or off the field. And yeah. I like the way they're having those conversations. Have you noticed any of that?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it, attention to detail, which has been something that the Chargers can't really lay claim to here for, you mentioned it, the better part, well, at least the last decade or so. Let's put it that way. And that may be, giving them a little bit of grace. But overall, this is a team that's been very undisciplined and guys aren't necessarily assignment sound. I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's being drilled into them every single day. And I think there's a standard there playing under Harbaugh where guys are afraid to screw up. And you should be. You should fear not performing under this coach because you know what the expectation is from him. Because this isn't some dude who, was a wonderkin and, was a great offensive mind and maybe ascended offensive or defensive and ascended up the ranks and hasn't really led a team, fully. This is a guy who's had success at every single level. So there's a different level of respect for him. And I think you see it in the effort these guys give. And I also really appreciate the tempo that they practice with. It's not just in the 2-minute drills. You can tell guys are in and out of the huddle. If it goes first, the second, the third team, there isn't much time wasted, which is why they get off so many plays. And they're being efficient with as many plays as they're running, getting off. And it's not okay to just practice. You have to practice well. So it's not just it's about perfect practice, working yourself up to that point. And I think having a leader like Jim Harbaugh, where everyone looks at that guy and knows that, there's a standard that they're all going to be held to, that they have to live up to every single day. It means something. And it's why we wanted a coach of this caliber for this team, is because it's someone that's lacked. It's what's been lacked with this team for several years. And I don't think it's a surprise that they're drilling so hard on the details, because the best teams do that. Leadership, or the players are reflecting their leadership. You can see guys stepping up and performing. Maybe when we get into the season, you'll see guys that you didn't know had the type of skill or ability they did, performing maybe above their heads, all because they feel that extra motivation to play for this coach. So the coaching staff in general, a bunch of guys that have a lot of experience, know what they're doing, proven, and it's trickling down. It's a cascading effect to the rest of the team. So yeah, I agree with you there. The coaching staff has had a huge effect. And it's been a struggle for the Chargers for as long as we can remember, for several years. So now we don't have that as much to blame. And if players don't perform, I don't think they'll just be sticking around because of the names on the back of their jerseys. They're going to have to earn their spots and show and prove. Yeah,
and you mentioned something that I think is important that I've seen mentioned in several write-ups, and that's tempo. Not just tempo in how they're running the plays, but how they're getting in and out of plays, on and off the field, from one drill to the next, from one phase to the next. It's something that Harbaugh has been really impressing upon them, I should say, is the importance of tempo. Of we need to get as many plays as we can in efficiently, effectively, get from one phase to the next, one drill to the next, one play to the next, so that we can hit everything we need to hit today. Because that is what's going to make us that team that nobody wants to see late in the season or in the fourth quarter. Because if we're playing with tempo all through training camp in the preseason, and then we're doing the extra conditioning at the end of practice, and we're, maybe we're a little dinged up during practice. Okay, let's go in and lift and build some stamina, things like that. They're just taking that extra step to get ready so that they can finish games in the fourth quarter. I think the lack of tempo, the lack of conditioning, the overall lack of, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say focus, but they haven't been able to finish because they haven't practiced in a way that allowed them to finish. And I think those attention to detail, the tempo, things like that, that's going to allow them to finish games down the line, because they're hitting it in August and they're not waiting until they've blown 3 or 4 fourth quarter leads to start preaching stamina and attention to detail and focus. So these are all things that are going to benefit them down the line. And it's just good to see those things popping up consistently in camp from the coaches, and seeing the players know that they can go to the coaches and say, hey, I didn't like that. Let's try that again. Herbert's done that several times. Some of the defensive players have done that. And it's always, okay, let's get right back into it. Let's fix it right now. And they get it done. So those are some encouraging things from an experienced coaching staff that you would think would carry over into the season as things move forward. And you got to see that.
You mentioned conditioning, and that's a huge thing, because it brings me back to, was that 3 years ago, Chiefs game in overtime? Was that 2-3 years ago? Forget what week it was. I was at that game. Travis Kelce walk-off touchdown in overtime, and how gassed everyone at the second level and then in the secondary was. Kelce looked fresh running down the field. He didn't like a tight end. He looked like a 4-2, 4-3 wide receiver. He was separating from Derwin and Michael. Well, Michael Davis hurt at that point. I don't remember. I think he may have been in, but just literally walking away from the defenders because guys had nothing left to give. This extra effort, these 20 plus minutes of conditioning and extra lifting after practice, I know some people may think it's a bit of overkill, but it pays off. And you need a winning edge. And sometimes if you have more stamina, even if you're not the more talented team, you just may be able to outlast them due to the fact that you have a little bit more to give. So all of this matters.
Totally agree. Let's talk a little bit about some of the position battles, some things that we're hearing or seeing, maybe some positions that we aren't hearing or seeing anything from. It's starting to become a little worrisome. I'll start with the new skill players, the wide receivers in particular. It seems like pretty much all those guys are stepping up and making plays at various points in camp. And it seems like that group is really starting to take shape in terms of who's going to be on the field and who's got to earn their time on the field. Just from the way they've been running their 11-on-11 drills, it really seems like the top 2 guys are Palmer and Chark, and Ladd is the slot. And that's the kind of the clear-cut top 3 right now for this offense. And then everybody else is kind of fighting for either time or spots. And you've seen guys below those 3 step up and make plays. They've all flashed at different times. QJ, I'm not going to get into, what we're seeing for lots of drops on social media, but I think there are people that are trying to push a narrative. So sure. Everybody's dropping balls in camp. It happens. They've all had issues with that. So we'll be fair and balanced here, like we always try to be. He stepped up and made some plays. In the intermediate and the deep part of the field, he stepped up and made some plays at various times in camp. We're seeing Brendan Rice step up and make a lot of plays down the field. It seems like almost every day he's making an explosive play down the field. Haven't seen as much from Cornelius Johnson, a couple one-handed catches, a couple acrobatic grabs. Not really as much. Doesn't mean it's not happening. Just not something that we're hearing a lot about. And I think it's going to be really tough for any of these UDFAs to make the team just based on the way things are shaping up. Oh, and I almost forgot Darius Davis is a guy who's starting to make plays. It looks like his route running has improved. He's understanding how to set guys up, turn them, create separation, and his speed. If he can find ways to get open, his speed is going to be a huge difference maker in the open field. Because one thing we know about this offense is if the running game is working, you're going to get a lot of wide open looks, particularly over the middle in the intermediate part of the field.
We're talking wide receivers in general. We've heard a lot, and all eyes are going to be on QJ just because he was a first-round pick last year, and the circumstances in which he was drafted, and who was drafted after him. So he's always going to be under a microscope. But to be fair, like you mentioned, there have been drops all over the team amongst even the top wide receivers right now. The guy that's standing out to me right now, who seems like he's on a mission to prove something, is DJ Chark. And you're seeing him win vertically, showing that he still has that speed to warrant like a safety help warrant safety help over the top, should I say. And that's going to be a huge thing for this offense, just based on the other skill sets. You've got guys who can work the short and intermediate portions of the field, but when you have someone who can really take the top off and requires additional eyes or coverage to maybe be shifted towards the side of the field, then you can do some really amazing things with your other weapons, especially guys who are stronger at the catch point, maybe underneath, say like a Josh Palmer, someone who isn't afraid to get a little bit more physical in the middle of the field, run slants, things of that nature, maybe taking some shots at the second level from linebackers. But you mentioned Brendan Rice. He's been making some really nice grabs, including some over-the-shoulder stuff, some really tough grabs in that way, and showing off his physicality as a route runner. I think he's improving as far as his nuance is concerned. He's kind of heavy-footed, but once he gets in the open field, he can really move. Called him, like, if you want to take it in track terms, he's more of, I'd say, a 100-meter runner who really picks up speed towards the last 20 or 30 meters of his run. He just needs a little bit of a runway, but he's becoming a much sharper route runner. Again, Chark, you're seeing him work different parts of the field as well. Ladd McConkey, we already know what Ladd can do. He's showing off in that way. I'm just being really agile, getting in and out of breaks. And as far as QJ goes, like, we can criticize the drops. I mean, it's always going to stand out, especially when you see as many clips of them as you do. He does need work with those over-the-shoulder catches because it's going to limit him as far as his game goes vertically. Unless you're talking about throwing a lot of back shoulder stuff to him. We know he's not the best 50-50 go-get-it guy. But right now, it's just tracking the ball where he sometimes short arms it. It's not for lack of effort. He just doesn't judge the ball well over his head, specifically to his outside shoulder. That's something that can be worked on. We've seen film of that happening. So we just hope that improves. But right now, the thing that impresses me is his improvement as an overall route runner. It's happened clip after clip after clip that I've seen. He's winning literally at the top of his routes, which was something that was a problem last year, and mostly because he was taking way too many false steps and he wasn't confident in his route tree whatsoever. Now you see him, coming out of his breaks, even showing a little veteran sportsmanship there. People call it cheating. As you're a wide receiver, you got to create separation in the league somehow. It gives a little nudge to create some space, but nothing crazy. Might give a guy a little bit of a forearm or elbow, and then he's really snapping out of those breaks, specifically on those out-breaking routes. Taller guys have an issue getting low, sinking their hips and driving out. The way that he's getting around that is he's not taking as many choppy steps. What he's doing is he's sinking right before he gets to that second to last step and then driving immediately out of it. So he's almost, it's something that can be coached, but also if you're a longer limbed guy, you find these little tricks and ways to be able to get in and out of your breaks a little bit quicker. And it seems like he's starting to master that concept. But, in the NFL, all those little inches here and there is what's considered open. And he's starting to show that he has that ability. If the hands improve overall, then he's going to make some significant strides. But I really like what I'm seeing from him in his route running because it's improved. I mean, so far, what I'm seeing by leaps and bounds. Now, the next step is we have to see if he's improved in getting off of press coverage and if he's a bit stronger off of the line of scrimmage. So I'm not sure how many snaps he's just going to take on the line. I don't think he should be playing a bunch of X. I doubt that he will. Probably some Z. They'll motion him a bit to get him the ball on the run and keep him clean. But right now, I like what I'm seeing from him as a route runner at every level. Just got to get those hands together.
I think the other thing you got to give him credit for is he seems to realize the hands are an issue, and he's putting in a lot of extra work with the judge machine after practice. Almost every day he's out there after practice for 20 minutes or however long catching extra passes. So, and it seems like he's working on trying to catch the ball with his hands, working on the over-the-shoulder stuff. I'd like to see him extend and catch the ball with his hands more on those jump balls that we're seeing him. He's still letting the ball get too close and trying to body catch, trap the ball against his body, which allows the corners to get into his frame. Use your frame, man. I think he'll get there, hopefully. But just it's encouraging to see him improving, like you mentioned, the nuance in his route running and putting in that extra work, trying to catch the ball. Because that's the name of the game for a wide receiver, right? You got to get open and you got to catch the ball. And he didn't do too much of either last year. So hopefully both those things are headed in the right direction. Certainly the work is something I'm sure the coaches are noticing.
Part of the reason when you show up to camp and you're a wide receiver 4, then it might light a bit of a fire under you. Whereas as opposed to last year, he was given the idea that he'd be one of the top 3 guys. There were no ifs, ands about it this year. Coming into camp at the best wide receiver 4, and you're going to have to earn your keep. So, yeah, that extra work is necessary, and it's good to see him doing it, showing some maturity and that the kid wants it. And that's really all you can ask for, seeing the effort, seeing the improvement. And we knew he was a project coming out last year. He wasn't going to be a guy that was going to be a polished wide receiver year 1. So just seeing at least one half of the game, the route running improve, gotta, be encouraged by that. The next step is the hands and the judgment of the ball, specifically in those over shoulder catches.
Which is weird because I feel like the judging the ball and tracking the ball was something that he was pretty much universally praised for coming out of school. It was the route running and the consistency of catching the ball that were the issues, but it seemed like people thought he tracked the ball pretty well.
So interestingly enough, and I mean, it's been solid 2 off season before last since we've watched it, but it never looked natural to me, even at TCU. What would happen was there was some pretty good ball placement. Specifically, let's say he's running a go ball where the ball just lands perfectly in the end zone. So, you've got that amount of space to work with, and he knows where the boundaries are and where the back of the end zone is. So he was finding instances where the ball was being dropped like kind of right in the breadbasket. Where he's struggling is the judgment of the ball and not short arming it. So if it's something that's over his opposite shoulder where he has to reach, he has a tendency to not reach far enough. People call it alligator arming it. But yeah, as far as the ball tracking is concerned, I didn't love it at TCU either. It was just overall naturally catching the ball, whether it's just a natural hands catcher, getting his ball away from the frame, or tracking it was always in question for me. But you had the idea that he was more of a vertical threat because he was a tall, fast guy, and they would, test him down the field a lot, and he was just taller than a lot of guys, so he was able to out-jump them. Even then, you would still see him jump and catch the ball in his frame, not extend, at the highest catch point, at the height of the catch point, should I say. So, again, just stuff to work on and making the adjustment from TCU where, again, he was playing against Big 12 defenses, and we all know how that works. So,
yeah, it seems like the tracking issue is a matter of being able to track without throttling down, continuing to run through the ball and track the ball while your feet are still moving at top speed. All right, so let's jump to another position. Do you have any position groups that are standing out to you that you want to talk about?
Before we move on, let's go to the backfield really quickly, because we're seeing something that is happening a bit more frequently than we thought it would. And it's kind of like, I guess you want to call him, what would he be, like the de facto fullback in Jordan McFadden? And we're not talking about just like a blocking guy, but they're motioning him out and putting him in receiving routes, which, I don't know if I want to see any balls being thrown at Jordan McFadden. I know he's an athlete, but I can't imagine they're going to seriously consider that happening too often. I wouldn't be shocked if they throw some sneaky red zone stuff in here and there, maybe throughout the season once or twice. So they're just getting them ready for it. But it seems like they're really considering McFadden in this fullback role, and it may potentially answer one of the questions as to who they plan on carrying in that role, or if it maybe opens up an extra position to keep another guy and let someone else go. Because McFadden's already going to be your utility interior offensive lineman, but he's getting so much work at the fullback position, and they're trying so many like wild things with him that it's really interesting to watch. And if he can pull it off, great. Like I said before, he has the athleticism to do it. You've got a 300-pound plus guy leading some already really big running backs, specifically when you're talking about Gus Edwards. It's going to be a long day for a lot of guys, especially if we're talking about getting to the second level and then working into the open field as a safety or a corner. You don't want to see that coming at you. So Joey McFadden is somebody who's really stood out to me. And I'm just interested to see how this carries over into the regular season and how much they actually plan on using him in that role.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting too is how much they've been moving the offensive line around just because Slater got banged up. We know Slater since last week has been, quote unquote, working through something. I think he was back at practice yesterday and today, which is a good sign. But while he was out, there was a fair amount of movement on the offensive line. At first, the answer was to move Alt to left tackle, actually, the initial answer was Salyer at left tackle. And then they moved Alt to left tackle and Pipkins to right tackle. We've also seen Bradley Bozeman play some right guard while Pipkins is playing right tackle. Pipkins has played some left tackle as well. They're just getting all these guys experience all up and down the line, which I've seen some people suggest that it's a little scary to have them moving around that much and not focusing on one position. But I'm a big believer that, good offensive line play comes from understanding what the guys around you are doing and where they're going to be. So if they're all cross-training and learning multiple positions, I think that only helps them understand what the guy next to them is doing. And it should help with some continuity. And actually, while we're on that subject, something else that stood out to me, we were talking about attention to detail earlier with the coaching staff. Something they've been working on a lot in camp, from what I understand, is blitz pickup and stunt pickup. They've been spending a lot of time drilling how to pick up stunts, how to communicate, how to pass off, who goes where, what everybody's job is, which I love because that was a huge Achilles heel for this offensive line. Really last year, it's been an issue for the last couple of years. They just didn't have anybody that could teach it, and now they're teaching it, and they're making it a focal point of training camp. They're working on something that killed them over and over last year that was never really fully addressed, and now they're addressing it as often as they can with drills, with communication, and I love it because it's just another example of what a difference an experienced coaching staff can make.
Well, specifically in late game situations, how many games did the Chargers just take themselves out of at the very end of it when they had an opportunity to maybe drive to take a lead or tie a game up to get into overtime, where you just see guys running scot-free on stunts? Just having no communication on the interior, guys just looping in, taking easy free shots at Herbert. So clearly they saw that there were possibly some communication issues there, and they're attacking some of the biggest weaknesses. So again, real coaching matters. It's not rocket science. You have a weakness, you absolutely want to take the opportunity and time you need to adjust and fix these things. But just looking at some of the things that have pained them in the biggest moments and making it a point of emphasis to ensure that it's not something that buries them in big games or late moments says everything you need to know about this coaching staff.
Yeah, you can't continue to let the same things haunt you and hurt you and kill you every week because you just don't know how to address them. Mm-hmm. And now they've got a staff that obviously knows how to teach offensive line and is addressing those issues. And hopefully it will not continue to be an issue because they put that kind of time into working on it. So again, just another thing I love seeing from the coaching staff, finding things that haunt the team, whether it's conditioning, a lack of attention to detail, stunt pickups, things like that, and finding a way to work it into the practice and drill it so that it's no longer an issue. Just, God, it's so nice to have a professional head coach.
It was something else I was going to mention. I see it in the chat there also. Jared Patterson seems like the clear RB3 right now, which I don't think is something anyone saw coming to fruition to this point. You know that Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are your RB1 and RB2, but Patterson's been getting some significant snaps in that third spot and taking a bunch of reps. So I'm not sure what that means for Spiller and Kamani Vidal, but specifically Spiller. I haven't heard much about either one of those guys to this point. But every time I see a clip for any significant period of time, I see way more Patterson than I see either of those two. So there's something that Patterson's doing. Overall, I don't feel like I've heard his name very often, but I see him almost every time there's a clip in practice whatsoever. I mean, they were showing some of the practice on NFL Network. I believe that was yesterday. I saw a ton of Patterson, very little Spiller and Vidal, though.
The only thing I will add to that is that they've been going out of their way to work Spiller into special teams. I believe he's been fit in on the punt team. So he did not play much or any special teams last year. So, or the last 2 years, I should say. So the fact that they're working him in on special teams and trying to figure out if he has that value, I think maybe at least suggests that they're trying to find a way to keep him, possibly. But from what I read, it's Dobbins and Gus clearly are the 1 and 2s, and everybody else is kind of fighting for time right now. So Patterson seems like he's having a good camp. Vidal, I think, has flashed a few times. Not so much longer runs, but some first down runs, some tough runs, making guys miss, breaking tackles, things like that. So, that we kind of knew going in, right? Those Dobbins and Edwards were going to be 1 and 2, and then we had 4 or 5 guys fighting for 2 spots behind them. So plenty of opportunity to earn time at running back 3 and probably running back 4, because you're probably going to need to carry 2 extras, realizing that Dobbins probably is not going to stay healthy all year.
And there should be a competition for those spots, or specifically for their RB3 spot, because like you mentioned, 9 times out of 10, we don't know what version of J.K. Dobbins we're going to get, if he's going to hold up. Hopefully he does, because he has an opportunity there to really contribute in that running game, especially if he has anything left from what he was when he originally got into the league, if that explosiveness is still there. But yeah, nothing should be handed to them. We know who RB1 and RB2 are, but that 3 should be a battle, and it'd be really nice to have a guy in that position that can do a little bit of everything. They drafted Vidal. That's a hardball guy, so there's a leg up there right now when we're talking about positioning over potentially the other 2 guys. You know how I feel about Isaiah Spiller. Just hopefully this preseason, those guys are definitely going to get burned, and we'll see who steps up. And I think whoever puts their hand up and says, "Hey, this is my spot. I want it," they're going to earn it in these 3 preseason games, and there'll be no doubt about it. They may actually have a very, very difficult decision to make. Vidal's not going anywhere, but trying to find a way to keep Spiller. If he can give you anything on special teams, great. I do think, what was he playing? Personal protector on punt, I would imagine.
I think so.
Yeah, so if he can give you a little bit of that, and then we saw him convert. There was one play where I saw him make a really tough 4th down conversion to keep a drive going during practice, whatever they were practicing in that team period. So he still got that downhill running ability. Again, I would rather not have a smaller back. I want somebody who can get you some tough yardage on the inside and has some breakaway ability, maybe a little bit of that. So my personal preference would be for a bigger back. So hopefully that pans out for him, but we'll see.
So kind of moving on among the skill players, one name that I've seen pop up several times, who seems to be making a lot of plays in the passing game, is Stone Smart, a guy who I like. I think he offers them some athleticism, some big playability up the seam and in the middle of the field. We know Disley's going to primarily a blocking tight end. He'll probably get some burn in the short passing game as like a safety blanket. Not really sure what to expect from Hayden Hurst at this point. But Smart being able to create some explosive plays in the middle of the field, help move the chains, help stretch the field a little bit. That's something I think this team is going to need. So seeing him make some catches, I think, is really encouraging. And then I think a couple of the guys beneath him on the depth chart, Benson has flashed a few times from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. So they've got, I don't think Parham is necessarily a lock to make this roster. he's been going through something basically since camp started.
For the last 3 years.
The last 3 years, endlessly. So, a guy like Mason, a guy like Smart, wouldn't surprise me to see one or both of them make the roster at this point, just because Parham is never on the field, and they need some guys who can catch the football and make some plays. So, good to see those guys at the back of the tight end depth chart kind of ascending and making plays and kind of making the coaches notice them.
I mean, Parham's perpetually going through something. So at this point, it's just kind of one of those situations where it's like, hey, kid, give me a reason to keep you. Like, we see the talent. You're 6'8". Tight ends like that don't come around all the time. You can run. You can make big plays down the seam. We would love to have you. Make us keep you. But if you can't see the field, then, you can only go so far with that. Stone Smart is a guy that I also like as well, just because he's still an ascending player. He's a former quarterback. He hasn't played the position all that long, but he's got like that flexibility to be like, I wouldn't necessarily have him play a ton of inline stuff, but he can be more of a split Y and H back, a guy you can get on the move there. But again, you can work those seams. You can get him on linebackers who you'll have an athletic advantage on. Even if you want to line him up wide and give him some burn there, maybe, in the slot against some smaller DBs, there are some matchup opportunities there. And like I said, still an ascending player, and he's only getting better learning the position. So I think they probably have an eye on that, and they see the development, and they want to keep him around as well. But right now, I wouldn't be shocked when we start talking about cuts if Donald Parham isn't someone very long for the roster, especially when you look at the other names that they brought in and what they offer, and what you can't get from 6'8" Donald Parham. You can probably get in a collection of these guys, but at least they'll physically be available.
Yeah, you would have to think with a new coaching staff, with a new front office, Parham's days are kind of numbered, especially if he's not getting on the field in camp consistently, which has kind of been his biggest issue, is not getting on the field. So we'll see what happens there. Some positions that I'm kind of starting to worry about a little bit, because you're not really hearing anything in particular about them. One is interior defensive line. I know Harbaugh has praised Matlock and Ford and Tito going into camp. Have not really heard much about that group really at all in camp so far. I know Okoye flashed a couple times earlier in the week. That had to make them pretty happy. But overall, that is a group, not really hearing anything about Agboigbe, not really hearing anything about any of those guys. Clark, Mason, none of those guys who we thought might be fighting for a 5th or 6th spot are really seem to be doing much of anything.
No. The name that popped up during Jesse Minter's presser the other day was Poona Ford, who, it was good to hear because he's been a show favorite guy. So, but again, we're talking about, Poona's 5'11", around 300. So he's a tree stump. That's great. He'll be effective on the interior. He's got a little pass rush to him. That's awesome. That's one guy whose name has stood out. But other than that, like you mentioned, I haven't heard very much at all. Scott Matlock is a name I expected to, or I still expect to take a substantial leap this year, but haven't heard very much about him either. Right now, things just, if we're looking at a position that they would probably want to attack, if at all possible, going into the season, this would be the one. Like, you've heard some rumors here and there about some potential trade opportunities, but I don't know if I feel comfortable, and I wouldn't be shocked if they don't with this unit. Of course, you're going to talk your guys up, but as of right now, it's not really about the names. It's just about whether or not these guys are performing, and they see more than we do. So, but just from the perspective of the reporting, when you're talking about guys standing in front of the podium and discussing some of the players who have stood out, there's just very little talk about this interior defensive line group. We've heard probably a little bit more about the safeties than we've had about the trench guys, and we know that this is going to be a trench first team. So that's been a little shocking. The edge dudes, you've got mostly a veteran-laden group there. So you're going to get the regulatory praise surrounding those dudes. They don't need to pat them on the back. We all know what they can do. But man, this team's lacked interior disruption for as long as I can recall at this point. And I mean, it's been a veritable who's who of names that have just come and gone throughout the years, and they just can't seem to lock an interior guy down. So if there's any move that they make that I think could be a huge boon to the defense, it's got to be on the interior, just because, the secondary is still a little bit up in the air. We don't necessarily know what that corner play is going to be like, but right now you probably need to focus on creating as much pressure specifically against the pass with that interior group and those edge rushes as you can to make life easier on that secondary, so they're not having to defend guys for 4 or 5 seconds. And the results of that, even for a really good defense, is going to be tough on the back end. So they need to really improve that interior to help out those edge guys, because, it's great that if you can get pressure on the outside, but, if guys can just step up in the pocket and deliver, then, it's kind of a moot point overall.
Yeah. I was really expecting to hear more from Matlock in particular in camp. And granted, we're still early. We're only 2 weeks in. But the way they were talking him up in minicamp and the way Harbaugh's been talking him up for the last couple months, I really thought we'd hear more from him, and we really haven't. And, Aboigbe, pretty silent. This is a team that needs a true nose tackle. Ford is there. Really thought Clark would get some burn. Haven't heard much from him either. So you got to figure. We said this when we did the defensive breakdown a few weeks ago. We really felt like this was one of those positions that they'd be looking at once cuts come, to add some veteran presence and try to add some depth and maybe some disruption inside. It's probably not the only one on defense that they'll be looking to do that with, but probably almost certainly near the top of the list. The other group, or at least another group that I really haven't heard anything about other than, hey, Dion Henley is pretty good in coverage, is the linebackers. Haven't heard really a peep about Perriman. Obviously, the only things we've really heard are Henley's good in coverage and Colson's going through something. Other than that, we haven't heard anything from the linebackers. And that's a group that was really thin and really dicey on paper going into camp. And it just doesn't seem like anyone is really standing out in any kind of a meaningful way. So that's another group that I would expect them to potentially look at during cuts, depending on what happens the rest of the way.
What's really wild about that is I saw a rep when Parham was at practice against it was a team period. It was against Denzel Perriman, and he broke on the ball and broke the pass up. And I know a lot of people kind of oohing and eyeing at that, but either Perriman knew what that play was, or that route was so lazy by Parham, because literally Perriman didn't move. He was 5 yards off of the line. They ran the play. It was like a 5-yard out that Parham ran, and Perriman didn't bite on the vertical threat whatsoever. He just sat on it and knew that an outbreaking route was coming. So saying that to say, temper the expectations about Denzel Perriman. He's a thumper. He's never really been a coverage guy. That's not really going to change this year. But great to have him on the interior to help against the run. But like you mentioned, Dion Henley, it's nice to have him great as a defender at the second level against the pass. We know that athleticism is going to pay off. You can utilize him as a blitzer to create some pressure. You can manufacture it that way. Some simulated stuff. All that sounds great. But Junior Colson not being able to practice, having the appendectomy, the jury's still out. Again, him having the advantage of knowing the defensive scheme helps. So we'll see how things come along as he starts to be inserted into practice. I know he was working off to the side. So in the coming weeks, he'll get in the mix there, and maybe we'll start hearing a little bit more. But as things are, the roster is currently constituted as things stand right now, a lot of it's questionable, which again, probably means you need to be looking at some interior help, because you got to keep those second level dudes clean, especially if they're not doing a good job at shutting blocks and attacking downhill and things of that nature. So you can't be weak in the interior of your defensive line and expect your second level guys to succeed as well. So it all plays together. But yep, not a whole lot about the linebacking core. And with Colson not being there, it is really nothing new to speak of. It's going to be really good to see Dion Henley finally get some burn. Felt like that should have happened more last season, but bygones be bygones with that one. And overall, man, they just the interior of that defense in general is a huge question mark. And again, for a team that's predicating itself on being strong in the trenches, I don't foresee them just standing pat and doing nothing about that.
Yeah, hopefully not, because it'll help the second and third levels considerably if they're able to upgrade that group at all. So we've kind of hit on some negative or less than encouraging talking points on the defense. So let's throw out kind of a little bit more positive talking point on the defense, and that's AJ Finley. And you can even kind of mix in JT Woods a little bit in that discussion. What we're seeing is, and we kind of talked about this when we broke down the defense a couple weeks ago, is not hearing a whole lot about Tony Jefferson. He's been working with the third team for the most part in camp. And what you're seeing is lots of opportunity for AJ Finley in particular, but also for Woods to get some mix with the ones, playing some dime, getting when Derwin comes down closer to the line of scrimmage, Finley's playing deep and he's making plays. He's getting good breaks on the ball. He's getting good reads on the ball. I think he made a one-handed interception today, if I'm not mistaken. So Finley's a guy who we liked last year. We were hoping he'd get some play last year when things started to go south. That didn't really happen. But now it seems like as a guy who can play single high, he can play split, he can play in the box if you need him to, play some dime linebacker. He can tackle, he can cover, he has good range, good decent ball skills. This is the kind of guy that they've needed on the back end for a while now, and he's young. And it seems like he's making the most of his opportunities. So he's a guy that I'm looking forward to watching when we're in camp next week. Going to be watching him closely when the defense is on the field, just to see how much ground he's covering, what his recognition skills look like. Does he make any plays? He's a guy that I'm kind of hoping breaks out and really earns some time on the field.
I think Finley has an opportunity to be a pretty good player. It's really good to see, first and foremost, JT Woods out on the field in general. And when you look at the two players together, Woods is the better overall athlete. Finley's the better instinctual football player. So when you're looking at both of them, I trust Finley way more than I ever do JT Woods playing, single high whatsoever. I would really only want him to split a high role just because he doesn't read the field very well. But Finley, I think, has an opportunity to be a real contributor in this defense, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being one of the better options for that third safety spot. Overall, watching Woods grow and contribute is encouraging. It also shows that, again, we keep alluding to the staff. This is what player development looks like from guys who are competent. So you're seeing names that maybe didn't get a lot of run last year for whatever the reason was, and maybe they just didn't come along as players. But now you're starting to see them creep up and maybe raise their hands to say, hey, I can do more than participate on special teams. I can be a contributor to this defense. And, year one, this is not going to be a perfect defense. They're probably going to add one or two more vets in specific positions. I think specifically at corner, they may look to add a vet. But, even if they get somebody else to play safety, I mean, Tony Jefferson right now is at the most, I think the highest he's been is working with like the 3s and 4s. I don't know how much of that has to do with, he knows the defense, but he's an older player. And even though he had a year off, maybe just working himself into form. But right now they need someone that they can trust on to be a contributor as like that third safety. And, I think they have some options there. So I'm looking forward to that. And we'll both be probably all three of us keeping very close eyes on that safety position because we know that it's a vital one for this defense. Specifically if it's going to mimic a lot of what that Baltimore Ravens defense was, because they have very good safeties, multiple good safeties. So this team really values it. So some guys are either going to have to step up or they're going to be looking for some vet help to, maybe fill some of the gaps there.
Yeah, the safety position is definitely going to be an interesting one to watch in camp next week for sure. Anything else you want to add? Any other positions that are standing out to you or not standing out to you?
Overall, not necessarily positions that are standing out, but just looking at kind of the battles. We talked a little bit about the movement of the offensive line. So Joe Alt, for instance, saw that he had to move from right tackle over to left when Rashawn went out for a little bit. But it seems like Joey Bosa has this thing for personally welcoming him into the NFL. He's got this thing with Alt where I'm not saying he wants to show him up, but he wants to show the kid like, hey, this is what you're going to be getting the taste of here in the league. I know that you're a first round draft pick, but you're not going to, you're not going to get your props off of me. But Alt's done a pretty decent job. I mean, it looks like he's won a fair share of his reps. He's taken some lumps also, but that's to be expected from a first year offensive lineman. But you also mentioned just kind of the offensive line kind of having to move around and adjust, and guys learning other positions. It's not a bad thing. They definitely need to have the opportunity to cross train at other spots because it's almost inevitable. There's probably going to be some guys that get nicked up, and there'll be a little bit of movement. But like last year, one guy went down, it blew the entire offensive line up. So, but again, not to get too far off track, it's just been interesting to watch Joey Bosa really go hard at Alt the way that he has. And I think he'll be a better player for it. Alt looks fine. He's got to kind of work on that anchor a little bit. When you're 6 foot, was he 6'9"? Somewhere around there. It's going to be rough when guys get under your pads, and who better to work against than, one probable Hall of Famer and Khalil Mack, and a guy who has Hall of Fame talent in Joey Bosa week in and week out. So happy with what I'm seeing from Alt, and him cross training at both tackle positions doesn't bother me at all. It's just been fun watching Joey kind of get his rocks off going against him.
Well, I think that'll do it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We appreciate you spending our Thursday evening with us. As a reminder, we've mentioned it a couple times tonight. We will be at camp next week. Garrett, Craig, and I will all be at camp on the 7th, which is Wednesday. We'll be sending out some information on Twitter about that. I'm sure we will arrange some sort of a get-together for dinner after practice, probably a local wing joint or something like that, but we'll figure that out and put that out on Twitter. So please, if you've got tickets, come find us, come say hi, come join us for dinner afterwards, grab a beer. We'll talk some Chargers football. Please follow, like, subscribe on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. That's the big one. So keep your eyes out. We'll be coming out with more content here soon as things ramp up in camp. We will be ramping up with the content. But thank you all. Hope you have a great night, and we hope you enjoyed it.
Yep. See you guys next week. Salute.
Thanks, everybody.